Well, this is a strange one to do from my bedroom. We normally do these in a nice big hall at Guy's Hospital. So this is quite exciting, but quite nerve-wracking that all the technology is going to work. But good morning, everyone. So Laura, can you just go on to the next slide, please? So I'm Leslie Soden. I'm the Programme Director for the Innovation Theme at the Health Innovation Network. We are an academic health science network covering South London, and we are one of 15 across the country. Each academic health science network covers about a population of about 3 million. Some are quite geographically large and some are smaller, like the Health Innovation Network. So we have three main aims: improving health, so improving patient healthcare and helping to identify innovations that will improve patient care and social care, and working with health and care organisations to adopt and adapt them. Also about driving down costs, so looking at where innovation can save money and free up staff time. And finally, stimulating economic growth. It's quite specific that we are there to be able to support industry who have innovation that will improve patient care and drive down costs. So we work with companies, typically startups, SMEs, to help them understand how they can work with the NHS and social care. And it means that we can get the best from new innovation, and that promising companies can grow and create jobs in our economy, which ultimately gives back to the Treasury. Next slide. So as you can see, we cover South London. We work with our members, so hospitals, with universities, local authorities, commissioners, primary care, the third sector, and mental health trusts. Next slide. Part of today's event is part of our innovation exchange. So every academic health science network is funded by the Office for Life Science to be able to support companies, innovators, clinicians who have an innovation that they want to be able to access the NHS and social care market. So we've got 4 core functions. We work with our members, with our regional partners, with our stakeholders to identify what the health and social care needs are and be able to communicate that out to industry. We signpost onto funding opportunities, other support programs like the NHS Innovation Accelerator. We also support companies to gather real-world evaluation and work with our members around actually testing innovations in a real-world setting. And finally, we support the spread and adoption of innovation. So this event today covers both the identifying the needs, so talking about what the needs are of the system and some best practice, but also about spread and adoption of innovation. And you'll hear some very exciting pitches later from 10 companies. Next slide. So we are delivering this in partnership with our DigitalHealth.London Accelerator programme. This is a programme covering all of London and working with London's 3 academic health science networks, so including UCL Partners and Imperial College Health Partners and the Health Innovation Network. It's supported by NHS England and the Mayor's Office, and also through the European Regional Development Fund and with our charity partner, CW+, which is Chelsea and Westminster Hospitals charity. Next slide. So Digital Health London's flagship accelerator programme is, at the moment, it's very timely to have this event because from Monday opened the next application round for the next cohort of accelerator companies. So working with approximately 10 high potential small and medium-sized enterprises over a 12-month period. And I believe that we've got some of the navigators, they get a dedicated navigator. We've got some of the navigators on, so they may be in some of your breakout rooms later. But the programme runs over 12 months, and it's being able to broker meaningful connections, access to workshops and bespoke support and advice, and also just a little, they've got after this, they have a Twitter live Q&A, so if there's any companies that are interested in joining or finding out more about that. So I'm going to pass over to James Willard from Oxley's. Really excited. I've already seen the presentation, so I'm very excited to hear about what James is going to be talking about how they use digital self-management platforms, digital solutions within their mental health services. Thanks, James.
Hi there. Thanks, Laura. Can I have my first slide, please? Thanks very much. So, as Leslie introduced me, I'm Dr. James Willard. I have two roles here. I'm the National Specialty Advisor at NHS England for digital mental health, so leading on the kind of national work around how we adopt digital and digital processes, cultures and practices and technologies in mental health, as well as being a Chief Clinical Information Officer and clinician at Oxley's NHS Trust. And I guess my reflections today reflect both my experience at a national level over the last 5 years, but also my kind of day job as a clinician, as well as the challenges I face as a CCIO. I was struck when I was doing this, putting together this presentation by this stock photography image that I have in my sort of file of presentation images, or images to use in presentation, and just how unusual this feels now, having three people sat that close together around a piece of technology. But I guess the thing I wanted to reflect on when we're thinking about self-management in healthcare, and particularly in mental health as well, is just how actually we all self-manage our health, whether we're under the care of a mental health service or not. That actually, you know, if you're having an hour a week of therapy, that's still 23 hours and 6 days a week that you're having to manage your own health. And I guess that's for me where the role of technology is so key, is how do we start to kind of use that time to kind of more effectively. And I guess thinking about things of the concept of waiting time, what are we making people wait for in terms of getting support and getting access? So I think there's, whether you're in services or you've got access to support from healthcare services or not, or whether you're on a waiting list, or whether you've not even got that far, self-managing is a key thing to get to grips with in terms of how we can use technology in that space. Can I have my next slide, please? Thank you. So in terms of mental health, I guess one of the concerns and the kind of national approach is always trying to take as much of an evidence-based approach as we possibly can. And there's kind of different types of evidence we need to consider, particularly in mental health, but I think this might apply across different conditions or different areas of healthcare in terms of the evidence we consider. It's not just about clinical research, but about the evidence around good design practices, around behavior change science and implementation. So thinking about behavior change, we've been, certainly in my clinical team, using the kind of concepts of patient activation. So thinking about how we use the patient activation scale developed over in America by Kaiser, I believe, to think about how we move people up that activation scale so that they feel more a greater sense of mastery in managing their own health. And I think that core concept of mastery, which is key to psychological therapy, is also important in managing one's own health. Normalization process theory, I first heard about this from Elizabeth Murray at UCL, who's a professor of digital primary care at UCL, done lots of work around implementation. Normalization process theory really helps us think about and evaluate how things become normal practice. And I guess that's thinking about self-management and the use of digital. That's both in terms of us as individuals, but also as services. How do we start to think about these self-management tools, and how do they become embedded in the normal practice? In terms of the current research in mental health specifically, there is the kind of the biggest kind of strength of evidence, if you like, is behind the use of supported and assisted use of technology. So what does that mean? It means that you're not doing it alone, and I guess that's where peer support and other non-healthcare services, if you like, in terms of whether it's about weight management, use kind of supported ways of keeping people kind of motivated and activated to use this technology. And that might be a check-in by a therapist, or it might be check-in by a buddy or a peer. Every week say, hey, how are you getting on with that app? That stuff is super important. It doesn't necessarily have to be designed directly into the app, but it can be kind of in terms of thinking about how we implement it. Most of the evidence is about existing models of therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a kind of key element, key ingredient to most of the successful apps on the market. So we're trying to basically take what we know, what works, what the good physics are of therapy, if you like, and move that into a kind of digital space. And I'm sure that's true for other areas as well in terms of diabetes management. I think it's critical, and I think this is something that I hear again, that downloads are not clinical outcomes. So, you know, we need to make sure that we're still collecting those routine outcome measures and getting a really good idea of the clinical impact here in order to build that evidence base. One thing that I think you can see the big difference is between well-designed apps that have understood the user journey. They've understood how to take people through those levels of activation using core design elements, and that might be an example of tailoring. So it's not just content for anyone, but it's content for you, and how we tailor that content. That's the beauty of digital. It can be responsive in that way. And so I think that's something that we need to kind of take more on board when we're thinking about how we design these technologies, and looking at the difference between them in terms of, do they use these elements? The NAS framework, the non-adoption, scale up and spread, developed by Trish Greenhalgh and colleagues, is a key overview of how to understand and analyze and perhaps prevent some of the barriers to technology adoption. It's something that we've been very focused on my clinical team, and is also something that's common parlance in my colleagues at NHS England and centrally in NHSX. It's something that we're using to think about how we adopt technology. Next slide, please. So one of the key things is about the key challenge, I should say, is, should we be doing this technology thing? Should we be offering digital to our patients, to the public, you know, when we're not quite clear that the evidence is there just yet for some of these things? And I guess there is a clear challenge between the kind of risk of doing something, recommending these apps, and the risk of not recommending. And I guess that's a key challenge in terms of looking at this evidence. And I think we have to acknowledge that challenge for clinicians on the front line if we want to get this stuff embedded. You may not be certain, but let's weigh up the risk of recommending something that could help and is unlikely to do harm, versus not recommending something and that person not getting the kind of support they might do from the apps that are out there. So I think that's a key challenge. Data safety, as the Chief Clinical Information Officer, Caldecott Guardian of Oxley's key concern is how we make sure that people's data is safe, making sure that the apps and the technologies we're using are using our data appropriately, storing it appropriately, and that we're clear in that consent conversation when we're using an app, that we understand what's happening with our data. And I think that's an area for improvement, both in terms of how we take responsibility for our own data as the public. Clinical safety is important as well, and I think that goes back to that risk evaluation, making sure that when you're thinking about using these products, you really thought about the what ifs from a clinical point of view. And actually, I've seen an increasing maturity in the conversations that I've had with product developers and product owners around their understanding of clinical risk and the guidance from NHS Digital around managing that. There are some standard resources in terms of helping us think about these things that are really key. In terms of the digital assessment questionnaire, really covers quite a lot of those domains that we need to think about. The NHS apps library, in terms of thinking about a useful resource to looking at apps that have been through that process, as well as the standards that NHSX have published more widely. Can I have my next slide, please? Are you able to pass me on to my next slide? Thank you. Right. So I think what's important, and this is a piece of work that I was doing pre-COVID, funded by the Health Innovation Network, to look at how we improve the adoption of technology by frontline workers in terms of healthcare. That's a key barrier. If you talk to, well, certainly the conversations I've had, is how do we get frontline workers more confident in using technology? And some of that, I think, is about helping them think about technology. Through our training as clinicians, we are given frameworks for thinking about problems, for thinking about interventions, whether it's about medication or therapy or making a diagnosis. And we need those same frameworks to become embedded in people's thinking about technology, so they can have really good conversations with people, whether it's a GP, whether it's a pharmacist, or whether it's a therapist in clinician. They need to understand how to have those really good conversations. And I want to draw your attention to the work of John Torres, who is an American psychiatrist, digital lead for the American Psychiatric Association, who's been working on this digital navigator role. And he specifically developed the role of the digital navigator in his clinic. So the clinician might say, hey, look, I think these digital products might help you. And there's my colleague here who's our digital navigator who's going to work through which ones might work for you, thinking about tailoring that package of interventions around digital interventions for you. And I think that's a really super important model. It might be a transition model in terms of filling that gap, working in the same way that pharmacists do to support the safe use of medication. But I think that digital navigator model could be quite helpful. One of the things that we were looking at in terms of the HIN funded project that I was working on with colleagues at St. George's was simulation, the use of simulation to help people become comfortable. My analogy is, you know, NASA don't send people to space before testing out all their people and kit in a big water experiment, the National Neutral Buoyancy Lab, effectively a big swimming pool. We don't tend to do that so much in the NHS as much as we might, and so let's think about how we use simulation. And I guess my tip for product owners would be, show me what a good conversation about your app looks like with a member of the public, and actually that makes it easier for me to get on board with it as a clinician. Care planning, how do we build in routine conversations about digital into care planning? On to the next slide,
got
please.
2 minutes. James, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So, coherent design. I guess I was struck by the book I read recently by Lou Down, who's a service designer, a lead director of design at one of the departments, I think Department for Transport in the government. A really clear book, 15 principles of good service design, effectively about how we embed technology into care pathways, that they don't just become sparkly baubles that get hung on a Christmas tree that looks a bit wilting, as I've said before. And I think we need to design in those data management flows. And I guess critically, here's the design challenge. How do we make it easy for clinicians, for managers, for patients, for the public, to do the right thing for them? And understanding those different user roles is really critical here. The right thing about having a good conversation, the right thing about continuing to use an app that is going to help them manage their own health. Next slide, please. So if I can have my next slide. Thank you. So innovation, yeah, the previous slide, which I won't go back to because I'm running out of time, basically set out the kind of elements of innovation governance that you need in a trust to manage this stuff, which is about processes. So think about data protection, clinical safety cases, thinking about information governance more generally, thinking about design teams. For example, Surrey and Borders now have design teams helping them think about how they embed technology in care pathways. Those are the elements. You need the right people. You need your CCIOs, you need your clinical leaders. In Oxy's, we're thinking about digital ambassadors to lead that frontline change, that support those clinicians in having those conversations. And I guess having those innovation governance processes in place will help you develop organizational digital wisdom, that you'll make good choices. And I guess my reflection is that digital wisdom is both at a micro level, the choices that we make about managing our own health and how we use digital both in good ways and bad ways to manage our own health, at a kind of meso level, at an organization level, making sure that we're making good choices, building that sense of organizational mastery around digital. And then at a national level, making sure that we're building that sense of wisdom in terms of knowing what works, knowing where it works, and making sure that we spread that so that everyone can benefit and that there's fair and equal access to the power of digital, for particularly in mental health in my case, but I think more generally. And I think I'm on time there. Apologies for the technical glitch in the middle there about my computer logging out. That's what happens these days, isn't it? Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, James. I found that really interesting, and lots of good tips on how to implement digital in clinical services. I think I'm going to steal that from you, that it's not a sparkly bauble, because I think that's a lot of the time that people think that's what it's going to be, a sparkly bauble. So I might steal that phrase from you. So the next speakers is Chris Scumble from the South West London Healthcare Partnership, and also Sean Azam from Sweatcoin. I have to say, my teenage boys never get excited about any of my work that I do, but when I said I was working with Sweatcoin, they got very excited and thought it was one of the best apps that was out there. So I will pass over to Chris and Sean.
So firstly, thanks to Leslie and Carla and the team for inviting me to present. My name's Chris Gumbel, so I'm a project manager at the South West London Health and Care Partnership in the incredible long-term conditions team. This is just one of many fantastic projects we're working on, although it's probably my favourite. So I shouldn't say that. So next slide. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the other projects that my team and I are working on regarding patient self-management. So we've got our UN Type 2 project, which has been developed within the NHS Testbed Wave 2 programme, and the project enables a new care and support planning process for diabetes annual reviews, which utilises technology such as personalised videos, new care planning software and patient-facing apps developed by Helum, and also access to remote education through Aviva. We are involved in the work with the Diabetes Book and Learn service, which is a collaborative project across the 12 South London CCGs, and it's a structured education booking service that offers choice of face-to-face or remote education courses alongside community support offerings. And this has been a joint working relationship between South East London STP, the Health Innovation Network, and South West London. Desmond is a structured education programme, and I've been an accredited educator for around 5 years, so had experience of delivering many face-to-face self-management courses. And we've got a brand new and exciting long-term conditions toolkit, which has a wealth of resources to support patients with diabetes, cardiovascular disease and respiratory conditions during both COVID and non-COVID times to stay well at home. Most of these resources as well have also been translated into at least 8 other languages in our BME section of the toolkit. And finally, we have this great partnership with BT Citizen Communications and IDAMU, who help to produce and deliver personalised video communications, which have been used in the UN Type 2 project to deliver annual diabetes test results. And they've provided a public health message for us to patients that direct them towards our long-term condition toolkit. Next slide, please. So why am I here? So it's to basically give you an overview of what we believe is an amazing new program, which is the Diabetes Prevention Decathlon. So if we're looking at what it is, so essentially we were an Innovation Grant Award winner 2019 from the Health Innovation Network, and we've developed this brand new program created to support the prevention of type 2 diabetes. And we created it to basically increase the choice from the national offer, which is the Healthier You program. So it's a guided 10-week diabetes prevention program, which is 2 hours a week. The first hour is a group-based interactive education session delivered by a specialist diabetes dietitian. The second hour is a physical activity session, which is delivered by a specialist sports facilitator from Harlequins Foundation, which are the charitable and community arm of the Premiership Rugby Club. The 10 different activity sessions will include things like badminton, basketball, yoga, exercise to music, or whatever the group deem necessary. So thinking about Sweatcoin and their involvement, we were trying to think about what we could do to keep our participants active in between their weekly sessions. And our original idea was to provide everyone with a pedometer. But we met Sweatcoin at a recent accelerator event, and they have a fantastic app, as Leslie said, that incentivizes you to be active and to walk. So Sweatcoin provides this within our program. So effectively, they provide team leaderboards, incentives for our participants to keep moving throughout the program. There's weekly based quizzes, there's videos that people learn, which they find really useful. So, and Sean will go into detail about what Sweatcoin does. And finally, we have our the way that we want to direct this program is every session that we host, we want to signpost someone to a local support service or an activity opportunity or a community event, which basically we're trying to align this with the NHS social prescribing ambition. Next slide, please. So our original bid consisted of a partnership between South West London Health and Care Partnership and Merton Public Health. But as you can see here, it's developed into a wonderful partnership between an exciting app, a famous sporting entity, and we've had massive input from the Behavioural Insights team at Public Health England and the Merton Patient Engagement Group. So we've kind of had this fantastic partnership that's made the Diabetes Prevention Decathlon what it is. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
I think Laura might be having some internet lag. I'll give her another second. There she goes.
Lovely, that's fine, thank you. So just wanted to briefly show you something that we produced in collaboration with Sweatcoin, which is another benefit to our partnership. So this was a kind of our offer leaflet that was accompanied with a letter to our participants. So we wanted to try a bit of a more modern approach, and we've had direct feedback from our recipients that this was one of the key enablers for them contacting us to book onto the course. Next slide. So, as you can see, we had planned a 10-week program, hence the name Decathlon, but due to the current health crisis, we're only able to deliver 7 of the 10 sessions so far. So this slide illustrates what was covered. So each week, the group participated in an education session delivered by Nicola, who's a specialist dietitian, followed on by a different physical activity session each week, led by the Harlequins Foundation. Patients were also weighed at week 1, 5, and 7, and then they had the option to do their own weight in other weeks. So as you can see, we did things like stretching, using bands, basketball, yoga, touch rugby, dodgeball. So our participants really got a flavour of all things activity, and it was a really good experience for them. So next slide. So after 7 weeks, we've reviewed the data, so we're really happy with our results. So from the outset, we set a course completion rate of around 60% of attendance would be classed as a completer. So out of our 31 original participants, we have a 74% completion rate. And then there's also around 4 participants in the group that only would have needed to attend one or more of the 3 remaining sessions to qualify as a completer. So we have the potential of an 87% completion rate for our program, which I think is far beyond our expectations and also kind of excels in its field. So with our ongoing 27 regulars, they had a total weight loss of around 39 kilograms over 7 weeks, which is an average of around 1.4 kilos per participant. One individual actually lost 6 kilograms over the 7-week period, and we have a small case study later on in the presentation to kind of give you an overview of how and why. We had another participant who lost 4.57% of their body weight, which is huge. And we had a net promoter score of the course of around 9.4 out of 10. Next slide, please. So the decathlon actually consists of a range of elements. So we asked the group what were their reasons for them to keep attending each week. So as you can see, the categories like meeting new people, working in groups, and especially the activity sessions were huge factors. But the exciting bit for us was using this new digital innovation of Sweatcoin. So especially in a demographic that you would believe would be harder to engage in using technology, around 80% of the participants also noted that Sweatcoin actually enhanced their experience of the program. So what I'm going to do now, I'll hand you over to Sean, who can guide you through exactly what Sweatcoin is and how it was used in the decathlon. So next slide, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Before I start, big thank you to Leslie and her team for inviting me. Thank you for everyone for joining this morning, and big thanks for Chris for the intro. So before I go on to this slide itself, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background on Sweatcoin and what we do. So we're a digital program and a digital software that's designed to improve the health and well-being of our users. And I guess we're set out to achieve 3 main things. And the first of those is reducing physical inactivity. So making physical activity free, fun, and rewarding, so changing these social norms. The second thing is around reducing health inequalities. We want to build a community where everyone is valued, everyone has the incentivization, and everyone has the opportunity to succeed. And then we want to use our technology to target those in the highest deciles of multiple deprivation, so those who really need the help the most. The third thing is then engaging local communities. So Chris mentioned this earlier on. We want to build a happy community of friendly people who want to help each other. And that's supporting each other, supporting local businesses, supporting local assets. And I've always said one of our proudest moments at Sweatcoin up until this point has been academic validation from the University of Warwick, who studied our app and our users and found that we do improve the behavior change of our users by 20%. And I've always said that's our proudest achievement so far. And I think that's actually changed now with the results of the Decathlon. So a really proud project to be involved with. And coming onto the slide now, as Chris mentioned, we first got involved through the DigitalHealth.London Accelerator, a fantastic program where at the launch event we were introduced to Chris, and we listened to the brief and understood what they needed. And at the start, that consisted of a leaderboard to support the participants between each physical face-to-face session. And so we thought, great, that's definitely something which we can help with. We then actually wanted to, I guess, showcase the benefits of our product and our platform and enhance the experience of these participants. So one of the most difficult things with these types of programs is actually the period between the face-to-face sessions, where low morale can kick in, or you can feel a bit down if you've accidentally binged on a few bits of cake, or slipped from the program. So what we wanted to do was provide that interface where everyone feels supported, and everyone has an environment in which they really feel they can achieve what they set out to do. And so on top of the leaderboard, what we added was a platform to deliver quizzes, firstly to reinforce the learning that they had on the face-to-face session. We introduced an element of prizes, so correct answers to quizzes would win little prizes, winning groups would also get a little treat, and kind of reinforcing that team competitive spirit and really getting people engaged into the program. And I guess to summarize that fourth bubble was really building that sense of fun. So we've been doing this for many years now, and what we found really drives long-term engagement and consistency with these types of programs is building a sense of fun. And so that was core to what we tried to do. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what the leaderboard looked like. So we divided all the participants into groups, and each week they would have a weekly step count challenge. And this was the core part of what Chris and his team had originally asked for. So move on to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we wanted to go one step further. So on the first screen on our digital app, the users could access their leaderboard at any one point in time. They could see how they were doing and how the other teams were competing against them. The second screen there actually shows how we reinforced the learning and face-to-face sessions. So the sports resistance band is an example of one of the exercises the users would do on a Tuesday night, and then we'd reinforce that learning by adding videos on how to do certain exercises and offering them the ability to win these prizes with their points. The third screen is an example of the digital quiz that we provided. So users would learn educational content on a Tuesday, and then again, that third and fourth screen showing how that is then delivered through the app to reinforce that learning. And on top of that, there's prizes for correct answers and that encouragement element there as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. On top of that, what we were really proud of was building a sense of a community, I think, yeah. So these users were all placed into WhatsApp groups, and they had a forum to communicate with each other. And I wanted to include a few examples of how these users were really, really happy and really, really engaged with their competition and the whole program itself. So these are all strangers, right? They didn't know each other. However, I guess all the elements of the program pulled together and that they all really felt...
2 minutes, Sean.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I'm actually going on to my last slide now. So to wrap up my section, we basically experienced huge behavior change. So the average group went from 750,000 steps in total per week up to past 1 million steps per week, which is an incredible example of that behavior change we deliver. Lots of activity on the app and high levels of engagement. So that's basically it from me. I guess the call to action would be, we'd love to roll out this project and program on a further scale, but Chris will talk further to that. So thank you. Next slide, please.
So we've just got a few more slides. So if you could do the next slide for me. So yeah, just a very, very brief overview of one of our participants. So our decathlete Margaret, she had a lot going on in her life, carer for her husband, keen pet owner, family history of diabetes, but wasn't really a concern to her, but she was keen to participate in the program. She actually attended every session. So when we interviewed Margaret post-course, I think The thing that she highlighted was about her activity levels, and she says, I was surprised at how much I could do at the end of it. Beforehand, I thought there was no chance of getting down on the exercise mats and back up again, which is actually a huge thing for her. She was a keen supporter of the Sweatcoin app and got her friends to download it. And also, I mean, review of the program, it was very enjoyable. You felt inspired to make changes, and it works. Seeing the weight loss, you felt like we were achieving something, and I love the program and miss not going. Next slide. So some of here are just a few reflections from our delivery team, but I mean, just in a summary, they're basically both really pleased to be involved, really happy to deliver the course, and they really liked seeing the positive effects it had on any one of our decathletes. Next, please.
Wrap it up.
Yep. We'll skip this. There's just more quotes. So just thinking about what we're trying to do next is we're still adapting the program. This is one of 2 cohorts. We're looking at venues, how we recruit people, expanding on our collaboration with Sweatcoin and Harlequins and potentially other people, and looking at group sizes. And the last slide, please. So that our future plans is to keep going. We have further programs to run in Merton, looking at scalability, looking at different areas. And our brand new thing we're trialing for our final 3 sessions is to deliver this in a remote fashion. And finally, can I just say I want to express my gratitude to the HIN team for taking a chance on us, to everyone in my team that worked on the program, because it's been a real labour of love, and I cannot recommend Sweatcoin enough for all the partnership working and all the effort they've put into our program. So thank you from us, and especially from the Decathletes. But that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks, Chris. That was really interesting, and I love a good case study. I'm not sure about the little infographic of the old lady. I'm sure that's not. It's always difficult to find the right person to visualize someone, but it's the results are so amazing. It's such a innovative project. So can I introduce Charlotte Lee next from Sleepio, who is going to talk about their experience of rolling out the Sleepio app and a few hints and tips. Thanks, Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Leslie. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a bit of a crazy last 2 months, and I'm sure that's the case for a lot of other people in the room. So my presentation is called Self-Care That Works. So when I was first approached about this, I was kind of thinking to myself, you know, there's self-care that could be a distraction, or there's self-care that can be therapeutic, and that's certainly where we feel Sleepio sits. And I'm going to sort of try and rattle through this presentation, because really the key lessons are there from the previous 2 presentations. You know, evidence is key, behavior change is key, as well as very strong partnerships. So let's take a step back. I'm Charlotte Lee. Hi, everyone. I'm a doctor. I'm a Darcy Fellow. I spent some time in management consulting. I also worked with the DigitalHealth.London Accelerator. And now I'm with Big Health, so where our mission is to help millions back to good mental health. So I've really toured the NHS in my very short career to date. But I don't feel like I've ever really left medicine, because I think that through the work that we're doing in Big Health, I feel like I'm still doing it in a more scalable way, sort of expanding that therapeutic benefit that I could have sort of beyond as a single clinician. Can we move to the next slide? Awesome. So I'm not really here to talk about Sleepio or Big Health per se. I'm really here to talk about some of the lessons and the kind of bigger picture. So let's set the scene. So digital health is a very large and growing industry. It's probably worth more than the 25 billion now, given, you know, the COVID-19 situation, the rapid digital transformation that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So, and the reason for that scale is that the ROI is very compelling. It improves capacity, you have better planning because of the data, and patient agency is improved, you have diagnostic accuracy, all this other stuff. And this is normal. You know, this is what we expect with some of these industries where digital is taking up, you know, is improving automation and improving the experience, and that data is driving change on a continual basis. So next slide. But to get there, it's still pretty messy within the NHS, and this is by no means an accurate map of what we're seeing at the moment. But reimbursement within the NHS, and probably most healthcare systems globally, is very non-standardized. And what we'd like to get to from a system level is towards some sort of national reimbursement. model, but we're not anywhere close to that. It's still very siloed and very fragmented. And what that means for our end users, so our clinicians and patients, is that it can be extremely confusing. Which app should we be recommending or referring for this particular situation or this particular condition? We don't have that system yet. So next slide. We set out with Oxford AHSN, gosh, about 2 years ago now, way before my time, to really try and solve for some of these problems, specifically with the digital therapeutic, and more about that later. Can we build a scalable distribution model and a commissioning model? And that was supported by an Innovate UK grant, as well as our partnerships in the system of Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire. Next slide. So whilst I can't tell you all the results because we're currently going through analysing and publishing about 3 papers on the impact of Sleepio on not just insomnia, but also anxiety and depression across these different distribution channels. What I can tell you is that as part of that distribution model, we've been able to scale up extremely quickly. So before the COVID-19 situation, actually in kind of January, February time, we had a look at the data. And then this is just kind of indicative. We can share outcomes later on in a few weeks. We had about 15,000 users over about 18 months in a few sort of areas within the UK. Fast forward to a few sort of 6 weeks ago, we have now scaled nationally to all health and care staff, reaching over 10,000 users now within the last 6 weeks. And we also managed to launch another product called Daylight, which has an RCT for generalized anxiety disorder. So next slide. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter what the product is. In order to build this distribution model, there are so many confounding factors. You need it to be able to integrate into the system. You need to enact behavioral change in clinicians, and you can't be working with a product that doesn't work, that's not standardized and it's not consistent. So what Oxford AHSN did was they had a look at some of the products, and Sleepy was chosen because it was just so de-risked with all of these. I guess you can see there, randomized control trials. We've shown to be clinically effective. We've had a nice medtech innovation briefing. We've got real world data to show that we're effective in IAP services and improving recovery rates. All these sorts of things kind of came into this package whereby you had something standardized and then you can start experimenting with it. So if we move on to the next slide, this kind of comes back to my original point around how Sleepio is a digital therapeutic. So digital therapeutics are software that delivers a treatment. It has clinical evidence, it has real world evidence, and it's meant to be clinically prescribed and used within a healthcare model, not so much a wellness model. So if we move to the next slide. Let's take a step back. Part 1 was really setting the scene. Lots of potential within the digital health market, but it's messy at the moment. Can we solve for some of that messiness? Yes-ish. Note, this is a recipe for scaling a digital therapeutic rather than something that is more broader for digital health, but I think there are certainly some lessons that you can pick out for digital health companies. So what I've been trying to do is create a recipe for scaling a digital therapeutic. Been doing a lot of cooking now that I've been in lockdown, so apologies if this is not so much recipe that's that helpful. So in terms of ingredients, you need a digital product that's proven to work. We've demonstrated that with Sleepio. You've got to have your team, you've got to have your innovation partner and your innovation team, so more about that partnership in a bit. You've got to have a scattering of clinical areas to test in. You've got to mix that into the digital ecosystem, so enabling that behavior change, and that you need to put elbow grease and good hygiene behind all of that because it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But you also have to weigh it up properly. So what's the economic impact? What's the clinical and real world impact? What's the uptake and engagement data, really? And all of that is really supported by this kitchen of marketers, PR, communication channels, as well as clinicians to really support the education piece. Next slide. So this is our team within the Oxford AHSN. As you can tell, we don't really take ourselves too seriously. They are absolutely brilliant. And what I would say is that, 80% of the success that we've had within the Thames Valley is because of the Oxford AHSN and the way that they've been able to plug into the system and develop the network and the relationships for us. Would you mind clicking, Laura? Cool. So yes, your innovation partner should feel like a second team. So you need to choose one who feels the same about you. So here's a very shameless plug for the Health Innovation Network and DigitalHealth.London Accelerator in general. They are fantastic. Yes, I used to work with them, but they genuinely still are. You've got the goods, they have the context. Let's put that together and make something really work for patients and clinicians. Next slide. So this is a bit picky, but clinical leadership is so key. And we know that this is something that is a shared learning across the system, whether or not it's digital therapeutics or digital health or not. To make any kind of system change or improvement, you need good clinical leadership. And the important thing here is that you have to have a champion within the different clinical areas to guide your thinking, to make those connections, to actually put in the work to implement your product. It is genuinely a feat of the clinical team on the ground to be able to make this work, and you shouldn't step back from that. So here are some questions to really guide thinking. Do they care about what you care about? Are they motivated by the same problem that you're trying to solve, ethically as well as the system metrics? And are they personally motivated to deliver on this service? And ultimately, you need to share this vision for a holistically better version of the healthcare service as a group. Next slide. And this is something that I think across the talks we've really hammered on, but it really needs to be underpinned by evidence. And I've got their clinical evidence and real world evidence. And you've got, essentially within the clinical evidence, it does what it says on the tin, right? It works as intended, there's direct patient benefit, you know that it's safe, or at least you know what adverse events and contraindications that have been, that need to be, clinicians need to be aware of, as well as the real world evidence, so that it's used, it is benefiting patients in the real world. Despite all of these confounding factors, there are system benefits like improved capacity and reduced costs, like Leslie said at the beginning. And ultimately, when I sort of reflected on this, as digital therapeutics companies and digital health companies, in order to make us work within the system, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard than even analog services, because there is such a big jump in assuming that something works because someone is behind it versus assuming something works and it's completely automated. And this sort of evidence, I feel, and I'd be interested in hearing other people's thoughts about this, I think it needs to come out of every rollout that you do. So you need to have that comprehensive partner, but you also need to be conservative with how you design that rollout so that it is constantly spitting out the clinical evidence, whether you have gaps, real world evidence, where you have gaps, and health economics. Next slide. Hygiene factors, we've talked about this, and this is some of the hardest stuff that kind of underpins the networking, the relationships, and the vision, and the co-creation, and the clinical leadership stuff. So you cannot get anywhere unless you show that you are safe from a data perspective, that you're validated from a clinical perspective, that you're regulated, that you have the processes. More importantly, it's not about ticking a box, it's about genuinely shaping your company to have the processes that can be then trusted by your clinical audience. So I'm just going to pause there. This is by no means exhaustive. There are so many other validating organizations and platforms for you to go on. Always happy to talk about this in more detail offline. The other thing that's really missing from here, and something that I really like to work with the system, is around embedding some of this stuff into clinical guidelines more. The concept of kite marking. And that we don't have at the moment a standardized set of decision-making criteria for how you prescribe a digital health for what situation, how long you should use it for, all that sort of good stuff. Next slide. So, and this is kind of at the top of everything, and it's a bit pithy, but genuinely everything you do is just marketing, especially within the world of scaling. So you need to know your SEO, you need to know about social media ads and campaigns, you need to have your clinical champions speak out for you, advocate. More importantly, you've got to be able to make your innovation partner famous. And in terms of the behavioral change side, you cannot skimp on the education. You have to be in training events, you have to be doing webinars, you need to be educating people, not on your product, but on the problem clinically that you're trying to solve. Next slide. So this is a bit of a summary. So at the core of it, it's about, those genuine, transparent partnerships. Takes two to tango. And that has to be wrapped around strong clinical leadership and having that network to really advocate for your solution, your vision. It has to be underpinned by clinical and real world evidence and then communicated through relevant marketing, compelling storytelling and engagement with people. So next slide. Awesome. So we've obviously made our products available at no cost to all health and care staff. You can have them for free. So here are some links, some shameless kind of plugging here. Next slide. Awesome. So that was a real kind of rattle through some of our lessons, and I can really talk all day about this, to be honest. It's a real mix of the soft and the hard stuff, and you really can't skimp on that clinical leadership, your evidence, your partnership working. So thank you so much for listening to me rant on. This is me. I'm on charlotte.lee@bighealth.com. Reach out if you need anything.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. So I've just asked in the chat if anyone's got any questions for the speakers, and there is a few that have come through, but if anyone else has got any more questions, then please put them in. So can I just, the first one is around from Kishan about how did you get access to trials and participants to get data? I'm going to go to James first of all. James, it would be really interesting to hear from a trust side. How does, if someone's looking to get that access to be able to get to patients and participants, have you got some top tips about how they either work with that trust or how they do that? I'm then going to go to Charlotte and Sean because I think they've probably got some tips from the company side.
So I think from my point of view, I'm just going to plug my laptop in before it dies on me so we don't have another technical glitch. So I think from my point of view, it's certainly understanding the requirements. So we have in Oxley's, we have a research department who, and I would talk to those, that team first in understanding the kind of paperwork, if you like, the recipe I think Charlotte talked about in terms of that has to be cooked in order for a trust to feel confident. That covers the domains that I talked about. Clinical safety. Yes, we're going to try something, but is it still safe enough that we feel confident about it? The data protection impact assessment that we have locally, we can send that to you so you can understand what we need to understand. And then I think that clinical leadership, and I think Charlotte's point around, having one or two ambassadors, as we're calling them in in Oxley's, is really key. So having that conversation. So I think those are the three elements: clinical leadership, data protection, and clinical safety. And then a clear protocol that you've set out. So that first step is always the hardest, and I've had many conversations with digital technology kind of product owners, and it is super hard, and I get that, and I would like to support people as much as I can around that space. Thank you.
And Charlotte, do you want to give your view?
Yeah, I've asked our co-founders this many times, and ultimately it's about the team that you build within your company. So we hire clinical researchers, not salespeople. And what that means is that you bring on board people who have had a strong track record within the research that you're hoping to innovate within, because ultimately you're not selling into the NHS, you're doing service improvement. And you need people to understand what the current state is in terms of the evidence and the research, to identify gaps in that, and then to really support you in doing fundamental product changes to be able to do that research and to generate the evidence. So I'm really sorry, I can't give you a shortcut here. It's genuinely invest in clinicians and researchers and build that network from the bottom up.
Great, thanks. And Sean, any tips that you've got?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Charlotte, and I completely second that. I think often too many companies are trying to sell, whereas it's a co-design and you're trying to improve services. The thing I'd add on top of what Charlotte said is that there are a lot of support networks out there. So, HIN and the DigitalHealth.London Accelerator are a perfect example of that, of putting you in touch with researchers and a really good, strong support network to help deliver those types of objectives. So try and leverage as many of those as possible.
Great.
Leslie, can I just...
Yes.
Sorry, Leslie, I just wanted... Charlotte made me think about one key role, which is this, and I really like the idea of, hiring the right people. Don't hire people to sell, hire people to research. That's a key. But I think on building on that is service design expertise. Actually, and building on Charlotte's tip around, this is about service design and service transformation and service improvement. Having people who understand service design and go to trusts with an idea of understanding the full ecosystem, the full service pathway, and adding value to your offer in that way. Saying we're not just giving you a bauble, we're helping you redesign the Christmas tree, to take that analogy too far, probably. Okay, I just thought I'd...
Great, thank you. Next question to Charlotte. How does Sleepio support the IAPT services?
Yeah, interesting. So Sleepio is an adjunctive treatment. So to take you through that pathway, patient gets referred to IAPT services at your first appointment, your sort of 30-minute call with PWT. They'll ask a number of questions, and there's 2 questions within the PHQ-9 that relate to sleep. So if they score highly on that, then they get prescribed Sleepio, as well as other services, whether that's face-to-face care, whether that's group therapy, etc. And what we've tended to find in the past is that that's been very helpful, because one, insomnia is bidirectional with anxiety and depression. So we found that by improving insomnia symptoms, you mediate anxiety and depression symptoms. And in a study with a Manchester IAPT service, we managed to improve recovery rates from 45% to 68%. We're doing a very similar study within the Thames Valley at the moment. And we're going to be doing cohort comparisons between the cohort that had Sleepio for the last year versus the cohort that didn't have Sleepio in a prior year. That's matched on patient characteristics, etc. I can't talk about the results at the moment because that's still in analysis, and we're going to be looking to publish that. But always happy to talk about it sort of offline in a more broader sense through email.
Great, thank you. And the next question's to Sean and Chris. So how does Sweatcoin interact with existing social prescribing activities? And can I ask what evidence you have for sustainability?
Sure, I can go first, and then on that first question. So how we interact with existing social prescribing activities. So I'll be honest, we're actually in the earlier stages of this, and it's part of the reason why we're here today, is to get help of everyone around the table today. We are working with the NHS, obviously the project with Chris's team. We are now working with local authorities at the public health level, and that's delivering population scale behaviour change projects. We're also trying to now start working on more detailed social prescribing practices, so people can prescribe Sweatcoin almost as a solution to physical inactivity. And one thing I would say is that we are free to download mobile app, and so hopefully there aren't any barriers to scale. So that's the first question. Evidence around sustainability. Chris, I'll just take the first part for Sweatcoin, and maybe you can talk around the Decathlon piece. So in terms of Sweatcoin ourselves, we've had numerous academic projects who've looked into the sustainability of Sweatcoin itself, and if it works on a long-term basis. As obviously one of the main problems with behavior change tools is that they don't work long-term. The academic study found that for our users, they studied about 6,000 of our users, and 6 months after using the app continues to deliver kind of over 20% behavior change on a sustained basis. So that's on Sweatcoin itself. Chris, did you want to chip in with anything else?
I was just kind of to comment that the Decathlon is basically in its infancy. So what we're showing here is a really brand new program. We've put our heart and soul into it, so I guess we're getting great results because we've put so much into it. In terms of what it looks like next, we're still adapting. Our program was based on a face-to-face interaction, which for now tends to be not doable. So I think we're still early in our process. We're going to do a few more pilots across a few more areas, and then we'll probably be able to do it. Right now, I mean, cost effective, it is working. I mean, we're doing it at quite a good price, but we need to work out how that works in the general population. So that's really all I have to comment for that. So thanks, Dipti, for your question.
Great. The next question, I think probably opened up to all 4 speakers, is when marketing healthcare products to patients, which platforms do you think have the biggest impact in terms of reach and adoption? So I'm assuming that question's like platforms like the NHS app library. So I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I can take that one. I'm certainly not the marketing expert in our team. So yes, the NHS apps library certainly gives you a lot of volume. Plus there's the brand of the NHS behind it, so there's the credibility side as well. But I think it really depends on your distribution model. So for example, if you think about CPO, where we really want to be majoring on integrating into healthcare services and being prescribed by clinicians, the communication channels that make the biggest impact is sort of the ones that are run by CCGs, the education that you can provide to clinicians, and unfortunately it's a lot of kind of word of mouth, but it's also worth it because that's a lot more sustainable, because it's, marketing is not just about singing and shouting about this new bauble. It's about I remember James Willard talking about root and branch transformation, so that kind of behavior change and making it stick in the system. So you do have to go through more traditional kind of education channels as well to really kind of embed it and then allow it to scale. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. There's another very interesting question, because this is something we debate a lot at the Health Innovation Network. So I'm just going to ask, and I'm probably going to ask this towards James. So if frontline nurses wanted to support their patients with apps for healthy living, how would they know which ones to recommend? So from a mental health point of view, how do they know which ones they can endorse and which ones they can recommend?
Yeah, so I think that's the 2 points, just picking up on my presentation. One is that they've had a bit of education around understanding apps themselves and thinking about the kind of domains, and the American Psychiatric Association have produced a tool that helps clinicians recognize that. Obviously that can be supported by their organization, and that's something we do in Oxley's, is we try and kind of say these are the recommended apps that we think. I think resources like the NHS apps library are helpful. There are some others out there, and I know some organizations commission companies like Orca to produce apps libraries. So I think it's about understanding the domains to look for: effectiveness, safety, data. So just having a little bit of an idea about those, going to some of those resources. And I think critically, it's testing it out with patients as well. Having the confidence to say, look, I think this is really good. Can you just try this out for me for the next week? As far as I'm aware, it manages your data okay. It's safe enough. I think these are the things that I'd like you to have a look at. Why don't you come back in a week and let me know how it goes? And then you start to feel the confidence. Actually, patients like this stuff and it works, and you get the confidence to have those conversations. So I think it's baby steps. As always, take those small steps and gradually build up.
That's great, thank you. I mean, we're looking at sort of not a research piece, but something about looking at whether clinicians can start prescribing some of the digital platforms that are out there, so that they can prescribe those to patients, and whether there's a different payment model that's needed, whether it's prescribing like you would medicine. So moving on to our pitches, we've got 10 very exciting pitches, 3 minutes pitches from each company. We have got videos of all the pitches as well that will be going on to the Health Innovation website, but also to the Digital Health London Accelerator website as well. And the presentations will be there, so if you've got any colleagues that are interested. So just to close, we will be sending out a survey to everyone that's joined the call to ask whether you're interested to be contacted by any of the companies. So please do tick which companies you're interested in, whether you'd like some more information or just like to have a discussion. Please tick and we will be passing on your contact details. We'll also be making sure, as I say, that it's all the presentations are sent out and the videos, and they'll be on our website. So thank you very much. I think that was a really interesting conversation. Thank you to our speakers, to James, to Chris, Sean and Charlotte, and for everyone participating and bearing with us when technology might not work so well. If you've got any queries or you would like to contact the Health Innovation Network or Digital Health London, you've got our contact details on the screen. But have a great day, enjoy the sunshine, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.